Good morning to those of you who are joining online. We are going to be continuing in the Gospel of Mark, where we have found ourselves over the past few weeks. If you've watched online, and we've been trying to catch some folks up a little bit as to where we have kind of traveled thus far. So hopefully you can just jump right in, and we will be edified by the Word of God and formed into the image of our Savior and comforted by His grace and mercy. Today we're going to be looking primarily at the end, or the second half of chapter 5. On Palm Sunday, we covered the beginning of chapter 5, in which Jesus goes across the sea into Gentile territory. He is confronted by an individual who is possessed by demon or demons, and Jesus casts those demons out and sends them into the pigs, and they come rushing down and they drowned in the sea. We talked a little bit about the sea and how that was viewed in that time period especially, but the Word of God also kind of depicts the sea as the place where evil resides in many ways. And we saw in the new creation in Revelation how the sea will be no more, with this imagery of that evil and demons and things will be no more in the new heavens and the new earth, and we look forward to that day, of course. So if you have your Bibles, I'd invite you to turn to Mark 5, verse 21. And I'm going to read the entire section for us, and then we're going to work our way back through it, because this is one of those that you kind of need the whole thing to talk about the first part and the end part, and we'll kind of put the pieces together as we go. Mark 5, 21, I'm reading this from the English Standard Version. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus, by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him and in the crowd, and touched his garments. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked about to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. Two well-known miracles of Jesus. I think oftentimes, especially the woman who comes and touches. Obviously, we know Jesus resurrected or brought people back to life. But oftentimes, one of the stories that sticks with many people is that woman that simply touched his garments and was healed. And we'll talk all about some of those things. So we're going to jump back to verse 21 at the beginning. So Jesus was on the other side. Jesus was on the other side of the sea, in which he was in Gentile land, but now he is crossing back over to the land of his people, where the Jewish people were. And remember the difference in how he has interacted with people. Last week we saw him, and he actually says, no, don't come with me, don't follow me. Actually, go and tell the city, go tell the people what he has done for you, and that you might give praises to God. And so then now we, though, are going to see again him returning back to the don't tell model of approach. And so he crosses back over in the boat, and a great crowd gathered with him, and he was beside the sea. And so now here we have a ruler of the synagogue, somebody who was very important, a leader of the synagogue as to in conducting the religious life of the people. And what this kind of points to, though, is I think sometimes in our reading of the Gospels, we see how, or we put all religious people in the category of those are the enemies of Jesus. But here we even see leaders of the synagogue coming to Jesus, reaching out to Jesus for assistance. And what that means, I think we're going to try to chew on a little bit. But realize here that not all of the quote-unquote religious people were against Jesus. And remember Nicodemus in the Gospel of John comes to him at night, though, because he knew what the consequences would be. Here we have a Jewish leader coming and seeking assistance from Jesus. And so we see that Jesus is even making disciples amongst some of the religious leaders. Now realize what this could put into jeopardy, his relationship with the synagogue, as many who are in the synagogue were going to be not overly enthused that individuals are going to be associating with Jesus. So he comes and he sees, and he falls at his feet. If you were with us for worship today, where else did we see somebody falling at Jesus' feet? In today's reading, but also last Sunday in the resurrection account. Remember where we saw people falling at his feet? So Thomas today puts his hands in, or touches the wounds, puts his hands, and he falls down at Jesus' feet. He prostrates himself, and Thomas confesses, "My Lord and my God." And those are the words of Thomas. And this idea of falling before someone's feet, though cannot be said specifically that Jairus had a view of himself worshiping, but he is falling at Jesus' feet and asking for mercy. he is asking for and he is pleading for. In the same way that people would fall before a king, they bow before a king, and it's an act of humility. It's an act of saying, you are greater than me. And for us, of course, we fall at Jesus' feet as an act of worship because of who he truly is. He implores him earnestly. He says, my daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may live, or that she may be made well and live. The Gospel of Mark has a tendency to elevate the no-names as being bold in their confession, in their actions, and it actually kind of brings down, in many ways, those who are the apostles or disciples of Jesus. We see that throughout the Gospel, especially in the first part where the disciples don't really have a good idea, or they're asking, who in the world is this? Who is this person? Yet the no-name people of the gospel make a good confession and make good actions in their relationship with Jesus, which is very interesting in the Gospel of Mark and how he portrays that. And here he is doing that, or that the individual is doing this with what he does. So, how many times do you think that I've said, I by no means am a Greek scholar? Have I made that clear enough? 2, 4, 5. Okay, so I'll say it again. I am not a Greek scholar. Yes, I've studied Greek. I know how to use the tools and all of that good stuff. But we have some things going on in the original that don't come across very well into the English in this section and in some other sections of the gospel. So if you simply read the English, both of these stories are going to seem to indicate these people came before Jesus and that they asked for something, right? They were asking for the healing or the healing. Initial is the reaction or the ask of the father of his daughter, and then the woman asks or wants to be healed from her bleeding. But what we miss is that the word that is used in the Greek carries with it a lot more than just physical healing. And here is, so if you have on page 16, I think Scott and Ed have it. This word here, which which that means absolutely nothing to you. I understand that. But this word here is sozo, which is a word that conveys more than simply, oftentimes conveys more than simply physical well-being. Here, that she may be made well and live, this word here is sozo, and we're going to see this word appear multiple times in both of these readings. So that's how Greek works, is the word actually changes, which gives it its person, its all the fun things that are how it comes across as translated. So the words that we add to English, he was alive. The was is part of this word, or I am alive. That's the word changes in order to convey that meaning, and so that's the funness of of learning Greek is you get to learn how words change and the meaning that is conveyed within them for translation purposes. But again, not a Greek scholar, which anyone who is can obviously already tell that by how I just explained that. But this word is going to continue to show up, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we move forward. And so a great crowd followed him and thronged him about. What's the theme, or what is the demeanor of the Gospel of Mark? It's action, 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 chaos, chaos, chaos. And here we see that again. He's in a crowd, he's being pushed back and forth, and a woman comes and touches his garment. And I'm going to read for you a section out of Leviticus. I know, everybody's favorite book. Leviticus 15, beginning in verse 25. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her impurity, all the days of the discharge she shall continue in uncleanness, as in the days of her impurity she shall be unclean. Every bed on which she lies, all the days of her discharge shall she be on her as the bed of her impurity, and everything on which she sits shall be unclean, as in uncleanliness of her menstrual impurity. And whoever touches these things shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, she shall count for herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. And on the 8th day she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, and bring them to the priest in the entrance of the temple and meeting. And the priest shall use one of the sin offerings, and the other for burnt offering, and the priest shall make atonement for her before the Lord for her unclean discharge. And I know this is not fun conversation, but this is the purity laws that are a part of the Old Testament covenant. My joke, I don't know if I told my joke, but probably about a month ago, maybe we'll go 2 months ago, right? Everybody reads the book of Leviticus. Oh, this is horrible. How could anybody believe such things and act this way? It's just it's so mean. It's so whatever. Now today, somebody coughs and we say, "Out with you to the land of the unclean." You see, there are actual medical benefits a lot of times from a lot of the laws that are part of the Levitical law, but they were not to be continued forever. They were simply a part of the people and place of the Old Testament, and these laws we're seeing here. Jesus is saying these are fulfilled. These are no more. These are not what make you right before God. Rather, it is going to be Jesus. But what did he just do here? Jesus actually violates in the purity, or he is violated according to the purity law, because even the clothes of somebody who touches this person who is considered to be unclean is said to be unclean until the evening. And so he heals her, and she actually feels it in her body that she is healed, and so we see Jesus going against these things that are established in the old covenant. Not that they were wrong, not that they were not what was commanded to God's people, but Jesus is a new covenant. He is ushering in this new connection to God, this new covenant, this New Testament and this is no longer a part of that reality. And so this is on display here. So she was unclean. And then it says that in her sickness that she spent all of her money to try to be healed. This is not a poor individual. Well, she might have been poor at this time, but only rich people had doctors in this time. This isn't like, well, if she just would have had more resources, she could have got healed. Like sometimes we think about medical, no, poor people, there was no doctors for poor people. Only the rich, only the wealthy had access to any type of medical care and provisions in accordance with, or in this society. Now obviously their medical understanding and wisdom was not as what it is today, but there was still things that they did to care for people. So this is a wealthy person. What can we draw out of this? What applications? Your wealth cannot save you. Your wealth cannot protect you in the long run. Your wealth is only a gift, and it can be taken away like that. Your health is a gift, and it can be taken away like that. And what you do can only perhaps slow this reality, for all of these things will come knocking on our door at one time in one fashion or another. So she has no other option. She's at a loss. What am I going to do? So she goes and she says, I'm going to go find this Jesus guy. But in her confession, she again uses this word, this sozo word. For you, if you have it, it's the last word in verse 28. Again, it's altered slightly to convey person, action, and all of those good things. But it is there. It is sozo once again. And so she wants Jesus to save her. She wants Jesus to save her. And so she goes and she finds him and touches his garments. Remember, that's a no-no. That is a no-no, but she is desperate. She needs her Savior, and so she reaches out and touches his garments, and it is said to immediately, oh, there's that word again, immediately the flow of blood stops, her whatever is wrong with her ceases and is healed. And she knows that she is healed. It's not like, maybe I'm healed, we'll see how things go. She knows she is healed. And then we get this interesting section of Jesus very seemingly confused, which is always interesting to see Jesus confused, whether it is a willful, or if it is as far as just, I don't know, if it's just him revealing that he is in fact human. He's very human in these couple of verses here. He said, "Who touched me? Who touched my garments?" And his disciples, "Are you kidding me, Jesus? Everyone that you've walked around, you are not appropriately socially distanced at this point. You are being jostled, you are being run into, and you're asking who touched me. I don't know, probably 25 people who have touched you in the last minute." Of course, he knew something more was going on because he had sensed that healing had taken place. He looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down. Came in fear and trembling and fell down before him. So what did Jairus do? Fell down before Jesus. What does this woman do? Falls down before Jesus in this act of humility, for sure, and perhaps one could even allude to the act of of referencing who he truly is by the words that they are using, in that they are asking for Jesus to save them, sozo them.
So do you think they knew who he truly was, or that he was a healer, and that they knew he was a healer?
So I think they see him as a healer. But how many of us have made perhaps a right confession without a full understanding? I think, well, all of us, because none of us have a full understanding of who God is and what God has done. And what I do see both of these individuals as having a right confession without perhaps the intellectual dots that are kind of filled in. Because we don't, again, the Gospel of Mark especially doesn't present Jesus in his fullness of what he has done until he is on the cross. So we're still before the cross, yet we're still seeing these people make a right confession, a good confession. Jesus, save me. Sozo me. Don't simply make me well, save me. And I think that we cannot ignore those words, because I think they are vitally important in our understanding of what's going on here. So let's jump back to verse 29. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. So she wasn't sozoed of her disease. She was iotai of her disease, which simply means physically healed. If you have your handout, verse 29, it is the first word on the where verse 30 starts at the end of that line. That's where. So she is physically healed of her disease. Different word. Different word. To simply heal or be healed is what's going on in this word. This word carries with it so much more than simply to be physically healed. And so we continue, and she came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Your faith has sozoed you." Jesus didn't say that. He didn't use this word. He didn't say your faith has healed you. This is your faith has made you well. Your faith has saved you. And sometimes a mistake that is very easy for Christians to fall into is to fall off of one side or the other in regards to God and his restoration of creation, his making things right, his making things better, him making things new again. We can fall off on a couple different sides. So we take this section of Scripture and we look at it and we say, oh, if we only had enough faith, then God would heal me of my disease. And if you were with us for our comparatives of different churches and beliefs and things like that, you heard me talk about that on a regular basis. If you just have to have enough faith, and then God's going to heal you from your disease. That's a mistake. That's not what this text is presenting for us to cling to. Can God heal? Yes. Does God still act in this world and and act in positive ways? Yes. But there is no promise of, if you have enough faith, that all your problems go away. Okay? But then the temptation is to fall off on the other side of the wagon and say, well, God doesn't really do that stuff anymore. Or God God isn't really concerned about this in some way, shape, or form. And so we take the approach, well, God just He forgives me, and my soul goes to be with Jesus, and then I'm okay. That's falling off on the other side of the wagon. It's this idea of the whole goal is to escape creation. God sent Jesus to not simply forgive our sins by dying on the cross, but He came to restore creation. He came to make creation new. That's why when we talk about the new heavens and the new earth, this is the ushering in of the fullness of Jesus and what He did. Right now we are waiting. We have the accomplished work. We have the promise. We are simply waiting for the fullness of the resurrection and the new heavens and the new earth to be ushered in, where sin will be no more, but also where no sickness, no disease, all of that will be gone. But we do not have that in our possession yet, but we are looking forward to it. And so what we have here is Jesus is doing a both and, because where Jesus is, those things tend to take place, especially in His earthly ministry. And so Jesus is in many ways giving a foreshadowing of what it will be like. Disease, gone. Death, for the daughter, gone. And this is what we see here. But it's not simply disease gone, and it's not simply death gone. It's your sins are gone, you are forgiven, you are at peace. Oh, by the way, you're healthy, your body is doing what your body is supposed to be doing as it was originally created for. And so we see this in Jesus' ministry. He is giving a foretaste of the quote-unquote feast to come, the new heavens and the new earth. And we see this in his ministry. And so she falls down before Him. I've talked about this a few times too. Remember how so many people are the fear. Fear is the initial response when Jesus comes, right? We've seen this a handful of times. And for us too at times. Fear. I talked about it in my message this morning. Sometimes we don't want Jesus around because we are fearful, because we know who we are. Deep down inside, we know that this is the correct response when we are confronted by God. But when Jesus shows up, He delivers peace because of the cross, or the foreshadowing, or the knowing what is going to come. So Christ here is delivering peace in the midst of fear. She is afraid, and she falls before Jesus. And what does He say? He says, daughter. Okay, this goes to support what I've been talking about here. He doesn't say woman. He says daughter. So if we go back to chapter 3, verses 31 and 35 in the Gospel of Mark, remember that question that is put out there by Jesus? He says, and His mother and His brothers came out, and standing outside, they sent to Him and called Him. And the crowd was sitting around Him and said to Him, your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you. And He answered them, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking about at those who sat around him, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother." He makes a direct reference to this woman as in a family sense. So daughter, the words used by Jesus, who is a part of my quote-unquote family. It's those who do the will. It is those who bow down before me. It is those who hear my word and believe it. And so we see a reference here. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. You cannot have peace without a full dose of Jesus. Being healed only gives you peace temporarily. You need it all for you to have peace in its fullest sense. Can you have peace in the midst of sickness? Yes, because you have a promise of that which will be given to you in eternity. But you cannot have peace without the forgiveness of sins. You cannot have peace without being restored by Jesus. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. Now, I thought she was already healed, and I'd have to do a little bit more digging. But this just clicked to me as I was reading the Levitical passage this morning. It says that it takes 8 days, I think it said. So when you are declared that the bleeding has stopped, it took 8 days. So I don't know if that's a reference to your healing is in process, so to speak. I don't know. That thought just popped into my head, and maybe I should have just kept it to myself. That might have been more helpful. But there it is. It's out for all to see. And so she's healed, and she goes. And so now we turn to the other group that has come to Jesus. Again, using this word, we see that Jairus wants something for his daughter, and it seems to have a bigger thought, a bigger idea than simply physical healing. So Jesus said to the ruler, "Do not fear." Oh, there we have fear again. Only believe. When they go and they're approaching the house, and he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, John, and the brother of James. That inner ring of disciples, Jesus has those 3 gentlemen who there's the 3, there's the 12, and then it expands from there. And Jesus' followers and disciples are expand. It's not just the 3, it's not just the 12, but there's more than that. You ever wondered why there's just people yelling and wailing and causing commotion? Well, that's a part of that culture. They would actually hire people to cause a stir. In a grieving type of fashion. There's still components of that in Middle Eastern culture. We typically, as Americans, are fairly, at least our culture, as in Midwestern folk, we're pretty reserved in our mourning oftentimes, and we are in many ways oftentimes, we hide it, or we try to hide it. We go and cry in a corner. We get away from people to grieve. There's some other cultures that the mourning and the grieving is a public spectacle, without a doubt, and that's what we see here. We have a public spectacle because this individual has died, and so Jesus brings them in. Or brings Peter, James, and John in along with the family, and Jesus, as he's seemingly passing through these wailers and weepers, he says, "Why are you causing such a commotion?" The child is not dead, but sleeping. Now, what is Jesus saying here? Jesus uses a word here that occasionally is used for death for a believer. It's not the most common word that is translated as sleeping, that is meaning death, but it is used in other places to convey this idea of sleeping or being dead, as we would understand being dead. So is he saying that in a theological way, or is he just saying this to cover what is actually going to be taking place? Remember, what does Jesus not want? Excuse me. Jesus oftentimes wants his miracles not to be seen by the masses, so to speak. And so now there's maybe a plausible deniability because these people are weeping and wailing. They think she's dead, whatever it might be. And the response is quite telling. Did you catch the response? They laughed at him. So they do not see. So remember how in Jesus' parables, he talks about how the people who do not see, he speaks in parables because they do not see, they do not understand type of thing. Here we see this playing out in reality. Jesus comes to bring healing, to bring life. He tells them something, and they simply, their reaction is that they laugh at him. They put him outside. The child's father and mother and those who were with him went in and where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. Why the Aramaic words? That's what those are. So in this culture, commerce, the language of commerce was Greek. The language of the religion was Hebrew. And the language of the people was Aramaic. And many of them spoke or were versed in all three of those. As Americans, that is a little bit lost on us oftentimes, that knowing more than one language might be necessary to function in the world. When you take America and you overlay it, it goes almost over all of Europe. How many languages are spoken in that area that is equivalent to the span of America, where for the most part English will do you just fine. So just we forget that sometimes, that languages multiple languages are a necessity by many different people in different parts of the world. So he uses these words. Why? There's a theory that the idea that the words that he spoke were actually what conveyed the power, and so it can be understood in that way. That gets to be a little bit of a kind of a sorcery theory. If you say the words correctly, then it'll take place, and I don't think that's what's intended, to convey that, well, here, just say these words and these words will do what they say. I do think that perhaps this is not my own theory. This is a theory of Professor Wells, who wrote a commentary on the book of Mark, that it makes a connection back to a passage in Isaiah 26, verse 19, and it says, "Your dead shall live, and their bodies shall rise." And the words there match up fairly well with these words. And so it's this idea of pointing back to the promises that are given in the Old Testament. I kind of like it. I'm not an expert enough to say, yes, this is good. No, I'll leave that to him. I thought it was interesting, and it seemed to me to carry something that made sense. So why? All that to say, I am not exactly sure why they give you the, but those are some of the thoughts behind it. And immediately, there immediately again. So the woman is immediately healed. The child is immediately raised, and she got up, began to walk, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome and amazed with amazement. And he strictly charged them once again, no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So here again we have this command of Jesus, don't tell other people, because he does not desire to do those things simply to heal. He doesn't simply want to be a healer. Remember that. He came to preach, he came to proclaim, he came to die, he came to rise. He does not simply want to be a healer, but where there is forgiveness of sins, there is no doubt going to be healing and restoration. And so keep that in mind. One final point that I would like to make before we wrap up. I'm going to turn back again to the Old Testament, in which we take a look at Numbers chapter 5. Numbers chapter 5, we'll read the first 4 verses. So, keep in mind who some of the people that Jesus has been dealing with up to this point, and see if you can't make some connections with this reading from Numbers chapter 5. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the people of Israel that they put out of the camp everyone who is leprous or has a discharge, and everyone who is unclean through contact with the dead. You shall put out both male and female, putting them outside the camp, that they may not defile their camp in the midst of where I dwell." And the people of Israel did so, and put them outside the camp, as the Lord said to Moses. So the people of Israel did. Jesus has healed lepers. Jesus just healed a woman with a discharge. Jesus just had contact with a person who was dead. He is taking the unclean and he is making them clean. And we see this theme, uncleanness and cleanness in the Gospel of Mark is a very prominent theme. But we can see that. We see Jesus doing these things, dealing with people that he, by all stretches of the imagination, according to the Jewish way of doing things, you had nothing to do with them because they were not clean. Yet Jesus' entire purpose was to come and make the unclean clean, because that's what sin does to us. It makes us unclean, and his entire purpose was to, in fact, make us clean. And then we see this idea of washing that comes out through the New Testament. Washed in the blood, washed in our baptism, wash, wash, wash. Unclean to clean is a theme that runs throughout the Old Testament. And so we again see another picture of this.